I was going to use it for Joshua, but we don't.
All right, we are, I believe, recording now. And tonight's shiur was inspired by a question that Gary asked, I think, 2 weeks ago, which was, I forget the exact context, but we saw one of the many sources that suggested that Yitzchak had studied Talmud. Remember the context of the question you asked, Gary?
Yes, when Yitzchak said to Esau's son who was about to kill him, he quoted the Talmud as saying that a poor person is the same as dead. So
right,
rob me.
Right. Right. So we saw the midrash that when Eliphaz, Esau's son, had chased after Yaakov and was about to honor Esau's request to kill Yaakov, Eliphaz was a good boy. He had some allegiance to, it's unclear if the allegiance was to Yaakov or to Yitzchak. But anyway, he catches up with Yaakov and he says, I have a dilemma. My father told me I have to kill you and I have to listen to my father. He would have an aim. But I know it's wrong. I don't want to kill you. And so Yaakov says, I'll tell you a way you can get out of it, or how to escape your dilemma, is that there's a principle in the Talmud of ani chashuv kamet, that a poor person is considered like they're dead, right? What exactly that means, how we make sense of that, is not for tonight. And so Yaakov therefore gave all of the money that he had brought with him to Eliphaz, and that's why he had no money to pay for dowry when he finally arrives at Lavan's house, which is how Lavan is able to trick him into marrying Leah instead of Rachel. And the whole saga unfolds because of Yaakov's not having any money, because he gave it all to Eliphaz. That was one midrashic tradition. Gary asked the question, what are we supposed to make of the fact that Yaakov is referencing the Talmud in this midrash, right? That the Talmud obviously was written many centuries after Yaakov lived, so how do we make sense of that? So we're going to touch on that. I don't think we're going to come to a concrete answer to your question, Gary, but I wanted to explore some of this tradition because there is reference to it in this week's Parsha and certainly throughout Sefer Breshit, and we can find it in the rest of Chumash as well. But we're going to go through some examples from our Parsha, from the Yaakov story, from elsewhere in Breshit, and we're going to focus primarily on Rashi, just because he gives a nice summary of much longer rabbinic sources and midrashic sources that talk about this. And then we'll touch on the separate but very closely related question of what do we make of all these traditions that also say the Avot kept the Torah, that they kept, right, all the mitzvot, when it's not so hard to point to examples in the text where they seem to be in direct violation. So we're going to, that's going to be the second part of the shiur, and we'll go there. Is that a question I see, Moshe, or are you just saying?
Yes, I can save my comments for later.
Okay. So let me share the source sheet, and we will get started. And let me zoom in a little bit so everyone can see what we're doing. Okay, so the beginning of our discussion for tonight is when, after, right, Parshat Vayigash, it opens with Yehuda's emotional plea to Yosef to not do harm to Binyamin in particular, and Yosef can no longer withhold. He can't hide his identity anymore. And so he outs himself to the brothers. Ani Yosef, I am Yosef that you sold to, whom you sold into slavery. Ha'od Avichai, is my father still alive? And once he's able to convince the brothers that he is in fact Yosef, there then begins the unfolding of how the entire family is going to reunite, how Yaakov is going to come back. And so the message that Yosef sends with the brothers, but Yosef is running the entire economy of Egypt. He can't go back with them personally to escort Yaakov in the household. So he sends the brothers to go bring everyone to come settle in Egypt to live out the famine. And he sends the following, where the Torah tells us the following. We're in Breshit, Perek Mem Hey, Pasuk Kaf Hey, 45:25. Vaya'alu mitzrayim, vayavo'u eretz Canaan el Yaakov avihem. They leave Egypt and they come to Canaan, to Yaakov their father. Vayagidu lo lemor, od Yosef chai, v'chihu moshe b'chol eretz Mitzrayim. They tell him that Yosef is still alive and he is in charge of all of Egypt. Vayafag libo ki lo ha'emin lahem. His heart went numb. Right? I think in previous years we touched on the midrash that says that actually the way they broke this news to him was through Serach bat Asher. Serach, the fascinating daughter of Asher, who in the midrashic tradition is able to, in a calm and peaceful way, break this happy but shocking news to Yaakov, so he doesn't have a shock or go into a heart attack or anything like that. But in the Torah tells us, Vayafag libo, his heart skips or his heart becomes faint. He doesn't believe them. Vayidabru elav et kol divrei Yosef, so they tell him everything that Yosef said, asher diber aleihem. Vayar ta'agalot asher shalach Yosef lasetoto, v'techi ruach Yaakov avihem. Yaakov sees the wagons that Yosef had sent in order to bring back all of their possessions to Egypt. And then, Vatechi Ruach Yaakov Avihem, his spirit becomes alive, it's revived. Vayomer Yisrael, Rav od Yosef benichai, Elcha ver'enu b'ter marmut. So this, now he believes them. It's interesting based on what we saw a few weeks ago that now he's identified as Yisrael and not Yaakov. But Yisrael says, my son Yosef is indeed still alive. I will go down to Egypt to see him before I die. Anything strange in these psukim? Anything that draws your attention or that begs for further clarification, understanding?
Yeah, the fact that Yaakov did not believe his sons.
Okay, he doesn't believe his sons, right? Whether that's literally he doesn't believe them or he's in a state of shock is an interesting question. But right, why wouldn't he believe them? Why would they make up such a story? Is a pretty far-fetched thing to make up. So why would he not believe them?
His mourning lasted so long that he came to suspect that Yosef was still somehow alive, I think. Isn't there a tradition about that?
Yeah, so it says when they first told Yaakov of what happened, it says that he was not able to be comforted. And so Rashi quotes I forget if it's Gemara or the Midrash, that says that that's because you can't be comforted for someone who's not really dead. So all the more so he should have, that he should have believed the brothers when they tell him that Yosef is in fact alive. But what is it that ultimately convinces Yaakov to believe them?
Just to see that the cart is not enough, I think. So there's something coming to get me, but how does he know it's from Yosef? Maybe would sharpen the question, yeah?
Okay. So you alluded already to what Rashi tells us, right? That it seems on the surface reading, and you're right, Anne, it's a little bit curious and it's not so satisfying. But on the cursory reading, it seems that he doesn't believe the brothers when they tell him, but when he sees these wagons, these carts, then Vatechi Ruach Yaakov Avihem. Then he's revived. Then he has some belief. So what is it about these carts? Right? It seems that there's something about the wagons in particular that has an effect on Yaakov to believe the story that Yosef is alive. So Rashi quotes the strange tradition that why did Yosef specifically send these carts? Siman masar lahem, b'ma haya osek kishaporish mimenu. Right? Yosef didn't just send these carts to save moving expenses, that they wouldn't have to hire local movers, but that he was providing the means to bring everything down. But there was actually a hidden message in these carts. What was it? That when he left Yaakov, what is it that they had been learning? They had been studying Egla Arufa. They had been studying the laws of Egla Arufa. What's Egla Arufa? What's the halacha of Egla Arufa? literally means a decapitated calf. Right, so if a corpse is found in the outskirts of a city or found in the wilderness, and there's no indication, there's no way of knowing how this person died. So then they say that you have to, the Torah tells us that they measure the closest city, and the elders of that city have to go out to the corpse and offer this calf as a sacrifice, decapitate it, and make a statement that we had nothing to do with the death of this individual. It's a very strange halacha. What does that have to do with the wagons that Yosef sent?
Agalot.
Okay, so there's a linguistic connection that egel, or egla arufa, sounds like the word for agala, for wagon. And so based on that linguistic connection, Rashi quotes the Gemara that says that this is what they had been studying. That the fact that the agalot, the wagons, seem to remind Yaakov, right, seem to convince Yaakov, that's the sign that the rabbi saw. In these wagons in particular, right? There's also what you can say about the message of Egla Rufa and how that ties into the Yosef story as well, right? What the brothers did of abdicating their responsibility there's interesting connections there also. But we're just going to stay on this. It's, whether it's a solid linguistic connection or not is up for debate, but that is certainly what this is based on. Right, so that explains that when he sees the wagons, he was comforted. And also, why does it say Asher Shalach Yosef? And it specifically says that Yosef sent and not Paro. Even though seemingly Paro was still above Yosef, it would have been Paro's ultimate decision, but that Yosef sent these wagons. Okay, so they were studying a very complicated sugya in the Gemara, according to this tradition that Rashi quotes. Okay, that's the beginning, and that's scary, the connection, right? It's not just Yaakov who has a nice lumdish insight to save his life from Eliphaz, his nephew, but it seems that he was immersed in other sugyot of Talmud as well, that he was fully involved in Talmud study. A few other examples that we see with Yosef and Yaakov about that they're studying Talmud. So at the beginning of the whole saga, when the brothers become jealous of Yosef, why are they jealous?
Because their father favors him above the other sons.
The father favors him, right? He gives him the ketonet pasim, the coat of many colors. But what's the reason that the Torah tells us that Yosef is the favored?
He's the son of Rachel.
He's the son of Rachel.
Mm-hmm.
And the Torah tells us in source number 3, Yisrael ahav et Yosef mikol banav, ki ben zikunim hu lo. He is a ben zikunim. What is ben zikunim? Child from his old age.
Benjamin was younger, but
he has a younger brother. So Benjamin.
Right. But I've heard it said that he was the son who was designated to take care of Yaakov in his old age. Usually when there are multiple siblings and a parent is in need of care, usually it's not usually divided among all the siblings. It's usually one sibling who has primary responsibility.
Okay, good. So we could read Ben Zikunim as a child of his old age, but then we have the question of Binyamin. So Rina gives us another way that it's understood that Ben Zikunim is he was the child who was with Yaakov in Yaakov's old age. Not that he was born to Yaakov when Yaakov was old, but that he cared for Yaakov as Yaakov is elderly, or he spent time with him, whatever the case may be. Rashi gives us 2 other explanations. Again, this is all quoting from Midrashim and Gemaras. In source number 4. Ben Zikunim, the first is what we already mentioned, Shenolad lo le'et ziknato. He was born to Yaakov when Yaakov was old. So again, that raises the question of Binyamin. But this is what we're concerned with. Onklus tir game, bar chakim hu lei, that he was a wise son, right? And certainly we're familiar elsewhere with the connection of ziknut or zikina, being old, elderly with wisdom. So he was a ben bar chakim. He was a wise son. He was a learned son. Kol ma shelamad mishem va'ever masar lo. Everything that Yaakov had learned from Shem ve'ever, he passed to Yosef. And that's the second explanation about what Ben Zikunim is, that he was educated, he was wise, he was well-versed. The Varacher, or final explanation, Din ikonin shelo domelo, that they looked similar. I don't know how that connects to Zakein, and Zikunim connects to that, but that they looked alike. But based on this second explanation that Rashi gives us from Unklus, that Ben Zikunim is Yosef was an educated child. He was a learning child.
Zapan, beard.
Yeah.
The same visage, Ben Zikunim.
Right. So he had
He looked like his father.
Right. So if anyone read the Dvar Torah that I wrote for last Shabbos, that raises a big question because it says, what was the reason that the brothers didn't recognize Yosef? Is when he left them, he didn't have a beard. And now he's in charge of Egypt, he has a beard, so therefore they couldn't recognize him. So if it's a beard, then I'm not, it's again, it's possible for different Midrashic traditions to contradict each other. But then my drasha needs some more explanation if that's the reason.
How much
The drasha can also contradict.
Yeah, okay, fair
how
enough.
much older is Yosef than Benjamin?
How much older?
Yeah.
I don't know the age difference between them. I'm not sure what that is, but at least a year, right?
Uh-huh.
It could also be that the beard that Yosef is now sporting is Egyptian style.
Okay, but that,
And it's
meaning
not-
why the brothers didn't recognize him.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's very possible. Okay, you saved my drasha, Rena, thank you. Okay,
Glad to
so,
be helped.
Rasha was a genius. I thought it was a great answer.
yeah, thanks. So just a few, again, this is all sort of not background, but we don't need to spend much time on these sources, but just I wanted to point out some other places in Breshit where we see this allusion to Shem Ba'aver, to this study hall, to this institution, and I'm sure that this is familiar to many of us, right? So the next example, I'm kind of working backwards from where we picked up from the Yosef story. So when Yaakov is fleeing and when he has his dream, right? This would be right after his encounter with Eliphaz, according to the chronology of the Midrash. When he has his dream, it says, "Vayifga b'makom vayalen sham kiva hashemesh." He encounters the place, right, the Har Moriah, the place where the temple would be built, and he goes to sleep because the sun had set. Vayikach me'avnei hamakom vayasem mirashatav. He takes from the stones of the place, he places them around his head. Vayishkav hamakom ahu, and he slept in that place. Rashi quotes, why does the Torah tell us that he slept in that place? Vayishkav hamakom hahu l'shon mi'ut. It comes to exclude something else. Be'oto makom shachav. He slept in that place. Aval yudalet shanim sheshimesh beveit aver lo shachav balayla. But prior to going to Lavan's house, and the way that they work out the timeline is quite interesting, but there is a way of reading it that there's a gap in the chronology of the Torah from when Yaakov leaves Yitzchak's home and when he arrives in Lavan's house. So that gap is filled in the Midrash by saying that Yaakov spent 14 years learning in Yeshiva Shem Ba'aver. And so for those 14 years that he was learning, Lo Shachav Balayla. He was so immersed in his study, he didn't sleep at night, whether that means he didn't sleep at all, he didn't have a proper sleep. There's something special about learning at night and he slept during the day. I don't know exactly what to make of that, but Rashi again quotes the tradition that he spent time with Shem Ba'aver, or with Aver, learning and not sleeping. Chaya Osek B'Torah, why did he not sleep? Because he was busy studying Torah. And then finally, not finally, but the last example that I brought is with Rivka when she's pregnant with the twins Yaakov and Esav. So again, remember, Vaytor Tetsuha Banim B'Kirba. They struggle within her. At this point, she doesn't know that she's carrying twins. She thinks that she's carrying one baby, right, with split personalities. That right, whenever she would pass through a shul, a Beit Midrash, right? Some place of good. Yaakov would want to come out. Whenever she passed by a place of avodah zarah, of idolatry, Esav would want to come out. She thinks it's one child with a split personality that's attracted to both, and so she's very troubled by this. If this is the case, why am I? Why did I want to become pregnant? We spent some time with this also. She goes to seek out Hashem. What does it mean that she went to seek out Hashem? She goes to the Beit Medrash of Shem. So we have this very strong tradition that there was a yeshiva, right? A few details have to be worked out, such as how is it that Shem is still Rosh Yeshiva? Shem lived, right? Who was Shem?
Melchizedek.
Noach's son. So he should have died many generations ago. So how Shem is, right? It could be it was, dedicated in his honor and his memory, but the way that I always read it is that they go to learn with Shem and Aver. So who's in charge, who's teaching? But that's one question, right? Another interesting question here is why does Rivka go to the yeshiva of Shem ve'Aver? She lives with Yitzchak. Her father-in-law is Abraham, right? Why doesn't she ask one of them? Why does she have to go to a quote outside source when she seemingly has access to great tzaddikim in her own home? Very interesting question. I'm sure we could develop a whole shir, a whole drasha on that, maybe a different year. But anyway, we have a strong precedent in that there is this yeshiva, there is this Beit Midrash that exists, and the question is what exactly is going on. Just one final source on that is the Gemara in Yoma. We'll just give a summary. The Gemara wants to know how, right, very complicated question of how Abraham could calculate precise times to know Rosh Chodesh, to know a calendar, in order to be able to keep various mitzvot that he allegedly kept. So one explanation is that he knew astronomy. Then the second explanation, the Gemara tells us, is that he sat and studied Torah in a yeshiva. It doesn't say the yeshiva of Shem ve'Aver, but that's what everyone assumes it is. And then it says not only did Abraham sit and study, but Yitzchak did, and Yaakov did, and Eliezer did. And the way that they find the connection is through the same linguistic connection that started us here, because each one of these characters is described as being Zakein. So Zakein is associated with elder and wisdom, right? The Zakein, right? And that the Jewish people were never without a yeshiva. They were never without a Torah institution, because in the desert, right, it says that Moshe had to gather the elders. When they were in Egypt and Hashem sent the signs, with Moshe, he gathered the elders. So as long as there were Zakeinim indicates yeshiva bachrim, or yeshiva elderman, who are immersed in Torah study. So we have this very widespread accepted notion that there was a yeshiva, there was a tradition, and there was access and knowledge of the Torah among the Avots, even though chronologically this seems to be quite problematic, quite troublesome. I'll pause if there are any questions or comments up to this point. All right, so let's go on. So one idea, and again, we're not going to answer like any fundamental questions here, but one interesting idea that I heard is in the name of Yaakov Kamenetsky, about what was the yeshiva of Shem ve'Aver. What exactly was going on in this yeshiva? Yeah. He explains it based on the Midrash from Noah. Right, the Midrash is very familiar to us. The Torah tells us with Noah, Eile toldot Noach ish tzadik tamim haya bidorotav. This is the chronology, the story, the tales of Noah. Noah was a righteous man in his generation. So there's a very well-established machloket. Why does the Torah tell us he was a tzaddik in his generation? Mm-hmm. All right, so there's two opinions. The first is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Amar, I'm reading from source number 10, the Midrash Rabbah. B'dorotav haya tzadik, ha'ilu haya b'doro shel Moshe, b'doro shel Shmuel lo haya tzadik. He was a tzaddik in his generation, but had he lived in a different time, had he lived at the same time as Moshe, as Shmuel, then he wouldn't have been such a tzaddik. He was only tzaddik relative to all the Rishayim, relative to all the wicked people who were around him. But he wasn't an absolute tzaddik in all generations. He was only tzaddik relative to the people that surrounded him. And then we don't need to worry ourselves with the further elaboration that Rabbi Yehuda gives, but then we have the position of Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Nechemia Amar, I think I need to scroll down in the English a little bit more. Rabbi Nechemia Amar. Umaim, Umaim b'dorotav hayat tzadik, ilu haya b'dor shel Moshe, b'dor shel Shmuel, al achat kama v'kama. He says exactly the opposite. If Noah was able to attain a level of tzaddik in his generation, when there was no one else around him to support him, to provide a community of tzaddikim, then all the more so had he lived in the time of Moshe or Shmuel that he would have been considered a tzaddik. Mashal, and he gives the following analogy. Yitzlochit shel afar simon mukefet samid petil. It's similar to a flask of some sort of perfume that is sealed with a thread on top. It's totally sealed. Umunachat vein hakfarot, and this flask of perfume is placed among graves, among rotting and decaying bodies. And still, even though it's sealed, the smell of the perfume escapes from the flask. And even though it's in a very foul-smelling place, it still gives off a pleasant smell. Now, if it's still able to give off a pleasant smell when it's surrounded by decaying bodies, all the more so if it was in a more pleasant environment. If it was in not such a foul-smelling place, it would give off even a better smell, or its smell would be more pronounced or more recognizable. Or similarly, mashali p'tula shayta shruya b'shuk shel zonot. It's like one virgin, one virtuous woman who is found among prostitutes and harlots. Lo yatsa aleha shemra. In this one virtuous girl, there's no bad. She doesn't have a bad reputation. Nothing bad is said about her. Ilu hayta b'shukan shel ksherot alachat kama v'kama. Had she been surrounded by other virtuous women, other virtuous girls, and all the more so that she would have a good reputation and she would be recognized for her virtuousness and her excellence. So the same with Noah. Had he been in a generation with other tzaddikim, all the more so that he would be recognized for being a true tzaddik. What does Rabbi Kamenetsky do with this? What does this have to do with the yeshiva of Shem ve'Eva? He says that the key to understanding what the yeshiva is, right, is first of all, remember, Shem is Noach's son. So this yeshiva started right after Noach, or right with Noach. He says that the key is this, the analogy, the image of the sealed flask of perfume. Right? He says that the Noach and therefore the tzidkus, the righteousness, the Torah that he had access to was one of sort of closed off. It wasn't a Torah. It wasn't one that was shared with the masses, but it was private. It was something that was shared among the family, right? So that and Rabbi Kamenetsky says that the yeshiva, the Torah that was studied with Shem ve'Ever was this kind of private Torah. It wasn't one that was meant for the masses. It wasn't one that was meant for a generation filled with Torah and filled with other scholars. It was a very private, personal lesson. He also quotes the next source that we have, the Gemara in Brachot, which tells us that the Gemara is discussing what is the proper time for saying Shema at night. And it says, right, in the context of this whole conversation, it says that even if one has said Shema as part of the Ma'ariv prayer in Shul, nonetheless you should repeat it Kriyat Shema Lamita. That is the real mitzvah of Shema to be part of the davening that we say every night, or is the mitzvah of Shema to be Kriyat Shema Lamita? He said right before going to bed. So he says even if you've made your public declaration of faith as symbolized by Shema said in prayer, said in shul, said as part of Mariv, nonetheless, you still have to repeat Shema, Kriyat Shema Lamita, which is a more personal, private statement of faith, recitation of the Shema. She says that's what defined the yeshiva of, or the Torah of Noach, that he passed to his son Shem, which was the Torah that Yosef studied, that Yaakov studied in the yeshiva Shem Va'ever. It was a very personal, private type of Torah, right? A family tradition more than it was publicly available to everyone. So it was right. It was a very private, secretive tradition, and that's what was studied in this yeshiva of Shem Va'ever, right? It doesn't quite work out with all the midrashim that say that Rivka was able to just go in there and ask. Right? It implies, certainly, if we hear about yeshiva, you think that there's other students there, but it wasn't a widespread sharing of Torah, and it wasn't something that was intended to, for to go on public record necessarily. So that's part of the key of understanding, and that sort of bridges us to the second part, the question of what do we make of all these traditions that say that the Avot observe Torah. I think we'll come back to this description, this depiction of the yeshiva Shem Va'ever, but just to jump into the notion that the Avot, or we have a very strong tradition that the Avot, that the patriarchs observe the Torah. So what are some examples from Sefer Breshit that are used in support of this position, of this argument? But before we get to the contradictions, just what are some of the examples that show that Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov kept the Torah?
Avram offers the malachim meat and milk together.
Oh, so that would contradict it.
Yeah, but it must have been acceptable because they were not Jews, and therefore.
Okay, so there, some say, well, first he offers them the milk, then the meat, or right. But in that same story, there's a much stronger proof that people bring. What else does he bring to these guests?
Water to wash the feet.
He says to Sarah, "Maharilushi va'asi ugot." Prepare cakes. What are the cakes that she makes?
Matzah.
Matzah.
Oh, matzah.
Right? Yitzchak was born around Pesach time, so right a year earlier would have also been Pesach time. So
Really?
So they made matzahs because it was Pesach. You couldn't feed them chametz. It would be more problematic than
You
feeding
could
them.
feed them treif, but not
Right, exactly. Right, and so they're the same thing, the same set of sukkim say that actually the meat that he fed them was actually supposed to be the korban pesach, or whatever korban pesach Abraham would have been bringing. What are some other examples?
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
Just the fact that he offered hospitality to strangers.
No,
Okay, so that certainly is a
tradition
mitzvah.
that is-
But that we could chalk up to being the right thing to do, right? It's a good question, right? Do we treat people nicely because it's the right thing to do, because it's the humanistically right thing to do, or because Hashem told us to do it, right?
Maybe both.
Maybe both. Hopefully both. Hopefully both. But they're right. It's an interesting question. One of my favorite Divrei Torahs, I know that we discussed this many times, is why, right? It's said often in the context of Mishloach Manot on Purim. But why don't we say a bracha on giving Mishloach Manot? It's a mitzvah of the day of Purim. Why is there no bracha? So the Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg says, because if you would make a bracha on giving gifts to your friends, it would cheapen the act of giving the gifts. You make your friends think you don't really care about them, you're only doing it because Hashem told you to do it.
We have a single bracha for Birchas HaTorah in the morning that covers everything except an aliyah in the rest of the day.
Yeah, but we still, if we're doing other mitzvah, we say a bracha. Even if we made Birkat HaTorah, we still say a bracha on Natilas Yadayim.
No, the
Don't say
Birchas
a
Torah
bracha.
in the sense that covering Torah, if we learn Torah at various times, should one recite a Birchas Torah before learning at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then again at 1 o'clock in the
Right, okay.
afternoon,
So
and
so
then
what?
at
So
4
you think
o'clock?
so the first chesed act we do each day we should say bracha?
The first time one would do that because it's for the purpose of fulfilling the
Okay.
commandment, and so on, and everything else is extra and good.
Okay. So on
But-
that technical question, so go ahead, Rena.
But we don't make a bracha over Matanot Lev, Matanot Lev Yonim either.
Right.
We don't
We
make a
don't- we-
bracha when we give tzedakah.
Right. So some go like the Tzitz Eliezer and say because we don't want to cheapen the mitzvah ben adam lechavero. Some say that that the reason we don't say a bracha is because there's no guarantee the person will accept it. So you don't want to go into possibly making a bracha levatala. What if I'm about to give tzedakah to someone? Here you go. I don't want your money. Or what? You think I'm poor? You think I need your help? And they don't just take the money. So then I made a bracha levatala if I made a bracha before offering it. That's how some others explain it.
Yeah. There's that
Or
story about the Baal Tshuva who's chasing an anti-Semite who, for some reason, just before trying to kill the Baal Tshuva, who's recited the bracha for being a martyr and so on, Kiddush Hashem,
right.
the potential murderer runs away, scared off, and the Baal Tshuva is chasing him, going because he can't talk. It would be
Right.
a hefsek.
Right. Yeah. So
These are crazy.
right. So some other. So back to the Avos. So some other Pesach connections when Yitzchak asks Esav to bring him food, and Rivka intervenes and tells Yaakov go get two goats. So they're also, it's explained that Rashi says that she told him to bring specifically goats because it was Pesach time, was a Korban Pesach. Right, we have the statement that Yaakov sends to Esav, Im Lavan Garti Va'ichar Arata, as he's getting ready to reunite with Esav. Im Lavan Garti, Rashi tells us the Gemara. Why does he say Garti specifically? Garti is the same letters as Taryag. Im Lavan Harasha Garti, V'Taryag Mitzvot Shamarti. Even though I was with Lavan, I still kept all 613 mitzvot. Okay,
Yeah.
Now the fun part. What are some of the stirot? What are some of the contradictions to the idea that the Avot kept all the Torah?
Two sisters married
Okay,
to one
Yaakov
husband
marries
at
two
the same
sisters.
time.
What else? Nothing else?
The Akeda,
Okay, well the Akedah
trying to
said,
kill your own child,
yeah,
that can't be a good thing.
right. Some
So-
point to the same story as of Abraham,
So-
where he offers meat and milk in the same meal.
Erecting pillars?
Okay, Yaakov building matzevot or different altars to give sacrifice. Right, not just Yaakov, but right, the Avot that they seem to offer sacrifices in places that they weren't supposed to. They erected different pillars as monuments, which seems to be problematic. Right, Yaakov kisses his cousin, kisses Rachel before they're married.
Mhm.
Okay, so there's a lot of examples of
That's not specific.
the Avos seemingly not keeping the Torah, even though we're told that they did. So what are some ways that people explain this? I mean, let's just state the obvious. The obvious answer is
Outside Eretz Israel.
Right.
well, that's not. I don't think that's the obvious answer. The obvious answer is they didn't keep the Torah because there was no Torah to keep. Right? The Torah was not given until Ma'amad Har Sinai. So before that,
maybe there might be a possibility of a more moderate way of saying, not that they didn't keep the Torah, they kept the law and customs that they knew about and understood and observed. And the similarities between the Code of Hammurabi from 1750, 1800 BCE has numerous very similar passages to what we find in Torah and Parshat Mishpatim, for example, Ayin Tachat Ayin, except they meant it literally. And one of the differences is the real Torah is much more restrictive of Ayin Tachat Ayin.
Right. So that would be an argument that there was no knowledge of Torah, or that there, right?
It's what they do. It's how they live.
Right. So there is a fascinating question about whether Judaism, whether Halakha recognizes the idea of natural morality, right? Whether that there is some inherent set of ethics and morals that everyone is expected to adhere by, right? Whether that is what the Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach is, whether the Noachide commandments, or that's part of the Noachide commandments, is an interesting question, right? But certainly, it would be possible that we would expect there, right, if there is a notion of some sort of universal ethics or morality, that even before the Torah was given, that we would expect people, and certainly the Avot, to adhere to that set of ethics and morality. Right. The question before us is, well, did they specifically keep Torah? Right. Rambam, I don't want to say famously, because again, it's only famous if you're aware of it, but the Rambam writes that even though the story with Yaakov wrestling the angel seems to be the reason for the prohibition of Gid Hanashe, of the sciatic nerve, that is not the source of the halachic prohibition against eating it. The Torah repeats it because we only could be commanded al pi Torah, right, after Ma'amad Har Sinai, after the revelation at Sinai. The mitzvah had to be given again. It says anything that we seem to have a source for prior to Matan Torah has to be repeated. We have to find a source in the Torah subsequent when this mitzvah was given as a halachic requirement. So that seems to be in stark contrast to the idea that the Avot kept the Torah.
Is it important that the Avot keep the Torah as if they were followers of Samson Raphael Hirsch, or they were followers of Rav Yosef Soloveitchik, or they were followers of the Belzer Rebbe, the first Belzer Rebbe?
So it's right. So we can think of. We've all seen children's books depicting various times in history where everyone is dressed like whatever your flavor is, like a chassid living in 18th century, 17th century Poland, or they're a yeshiva bacher, right? With a black hat, right? And we could easily imagine there being illustrated versions of Chumash which have Avraham Avinu dressed as a 21st century yeshiva bacher with a black hat, black pants, and white shirt, and things like that, right? So doesn't matter which version, which tradition of Torah is another interesting question. So just a few sources that sort of try to wrestle with this seeming contradiction. We'll touch on what Anne mentioned first, which is the Ramban in source number 14. He gives two technical answers, two ways to try to get around the seeming contradiction. The first, he says, is that in the Gemara, I didn't bring all this, so you can look in source number 12. It touches on it a little bit, but the Gemara certainly makes a big deal, specifically when it comes to Shabbos, right? That it says that the Avos kept all the Torah, even Eruv Tanchumim, even when it comes to the laws of Eruv, right? So he says that it could be that there's a certain emphasis on Shabbos because Shabbos either is a testimony to God's having created the world, and or Shabbos is considered equal to Kol HaTorah Kula, right? That the reward for keeping Shabbos is considered, right? as if you kept the entire Torah. If you violate Shabbos, it's if you violated the entire Torah. So there might be something unique about Shabbos that they kept, and the idea of Shabbos, even if, right, whether it was or wasn't all 39 malachot and all the rabbanans associated with it, there might be something special about Shabbos in particular, just like Yaakov was able to sort of tell Eliphaz, you know, if you take my money, it's as if you killed me. So if they kept Shabbos, we only have to build the case of them keeping one mitzvah, or one set of mitzvot rather than 613. So maybe we could say that it's only in regards to Shabbos that they had some idea of keeping it before, you know, in their lifetime. And that would still, you know, we could therefore live with them having violated other mitzvot so long as we can build the case that they kept Shabbos. That's his first approach. The second approach, right, how he proves they keep Shabbos, I don't know, other than to say that.
How many meals did they eat?
Yeah, I don't know, right? But I mean, we do have Gemaras that say that they kept even the laws of Eruv. So that's the basis for saying Shabbos. But again, that's much later than the Torah. Where in the Torah we find it, I don't know exactly. But then the second opinion he gives, I think, Anne, you mentioned it earlier. This is the second paragraph. And you have the English, I'll read the Hebrew. Hanira Eli midat rabotinu, shlamad Avram Avinu haTorah kula beruach hakodesh. That, right, the rabbis teach us that Abraham learned the entire Torah through divine spirit. V'asakba, he studied it. V'tamei mitzvoteha v'sodoteha, and all the explanations of the mitzvot in its secrets. V'shamaru takula kamisha eno mitzuveh ve'oseh. He kept it as one who is not commanded and does it. I think I cut off the Hebrew that I wanted to read. I apologize for that. Right, so first of all, they all say that, right, even if they did keep the Torah, there was never an expectation that it was kept as one who is absolutely commanded in it, and not that they would pass on that obligation to anyone else, even their own family members. But Misha Eno Mitzuveh Ve'oseh, someone who's not commanded and still does it. And then he goes on to say that all the examples we have of the Avot seemingly violating the Torah all take place outside of Eretz Yisrael. And so there might have been a special elevated holiness with Eretz Yisrael that wouldn't tolerate violation of any mitzvot. But fundamentally, they didn't keep all the Torah all the time, but when they were in Israel, they did keep the Torah, right? Yaakov, right, the most glaring examples, Yaakov marrying two sisters outside of Israel. Amram marries Yocheved, is somehow his niece, or, you know, also outside of Israel. So he says that the most glaring examples all take place outside of Israel, and so therefore we can, again, not have to say that they absolutely fulfilled all the Torah all the time, but that while in Israel there was a special elevated status that they had to adhere to.
Isn't it a kind of an insult to the Torah to say that it is geographically delimited as a whole? It's like it's analogous to saying that the Ribbono Shel Olam only has authority within the boundaries of Canaan, Eretz Yisrael, and we don't hold that.
Yeah, but Robert.
I don't know that it's saying that God only has control there, but it could be saying, and you know, there is Rashi in Sefer Devarim quotes the idea that, right, observing mitzvot outside of Israel, you know, when we're in Galus, is only as a means of practicing and keeping in touch with it, because really it's supposed to be done in Israel. And we can certainly buy into the fact that, or the idea that's out there, whether we accept it or not, but it's not far-fetched to accept that there might be something to the fact that Jews are expected to, or that our spiritual ideal homeland is Eretz Yisrael, is the land of Israel. What that means when we're not in Israel is an interesting question, but it's not far-fetched to say that the Jewish destiny and maybe the Jewish ideal place to be is in the land of Israel, which would give added spiritual elements to keeping mitzvot in Israel, and might even create a stronger level of obligation. Right? Again, certainly if you buy into any mystical tradition, that is very prevalent. And it just raises interesting questions. I'm not saying that this is right or wrong, but I don't think it's far-fetched. You know, I don't think it's hard to accept this as a premise, as a belief that people would have.
But it raises a problem of why Talmud Bavli is authoritative, but Talmud Yerushalmi is not.
Yeah, it raises very interesting questions, right? Because certainly, historically speaking, you're right. We follow Talmud Bavli, and our great sages and rabbis lived outside of Israel, and that's where much of our rich spiritual tradition comes from. And no one would say that the Rambam, was not a fully halachically observant Jew living in Spain or in Egypt. But that is the idea that the Ramban gives us. Let's just go back for a second to the Ramah of Moshe Isserlis. So he basically says, well, the first thing we said in the Ramban, that if the Avos did keep the Torah, they kept it as on a voluntary level, and that they were not at all obligated in it, and that they did it only as Misha Enu Mitzvah Ose, one who's not commanded and does it, which is certainly laudable, but is not halachically at the same level. And then the final position that I brought comes from the Or HaChaim. He also gives a few different explanations, but we'll just go straight to the English. He asks the same question, points out a lot of difficulties you can look at. So then he says, I believe that the patriarchs received the Torah from Shem, who in turn had received it from Noach. He brings us back to the yeshiva of Shem ve'Ever. So they have an oral tradition that they got from Shem. Noach received it from Chanoch, who had received it from Adam. And Adam had received the Torah from God. Okay, so we're able to have a direct train of transmission going all the way back to Adam Harishon, who got the Torah or this tradition directly from God. At that time, Adam and the patriarchs subsequently were only commanded 7 laws on pain of death. So all that they were commanded, all that they were obligated to do was the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, and that's not only for the line of Abraham, but that's for all of humanity. These laws are the ones commonly known as the Noachide laws, those applicable to mankind as a whole. All the other commandments which God revealed to Adam had only one purpose: to enable man to accumulate reward if he observed them. If he failed to observe those laws, he was not liable to punishment. The situation continued until God revealed himself to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, right? So they could only gain, they couldn't lose. They wouldn't lose out if they violated anything, but if they did something properly, if they were able to tap in to what would be revealed later in history at Har Sinai, then we would get, whether it's mitzvah points, whatever the reward is, they were able to get some reward, some benefit. The patriarchs made a point of observing all these commandments as an expression of their love for God, right? So, if they could, they would. However, he continues, whenever the patriarchs observed that by not observing one of these commandments, they would achieve something important immediately, they decided to opt for the immediate benefit. This is what happened when Yaakov decided to marry Rachel in addition to Leah. He wanted to have children by Rachel, and at least some of the tribes should be her offspring. Jacob was especially entitled to do so, since he was a prophet and acted in accordance with instructions received from God directly. We can understand this better. Okay, what's the point that he's making here? He says that, yes, the Avot knew what the Torah was, or what the Torah would ask of us to do in subsequent generations, and for the most part, they tried to adhere by that. However, if they saw that violating Torah was necessary in order to bring about greater spiritual achievements, or in order to bring about the Torah, then they would violate it, right? It taps into a very interesting notion, right? The idea that the Gemara talks about Avera Lishma. Can we ever do an Avera, a sin, lishma, for the sake of sanctifying God's name, for the sake of trying to elevate God, or for the sake of trying to do God's will. Does a sin, right, which seems to be the exact opposite of what God wants us to do, can we ever do that in order to bring about what God wants us to do? Right? The Gemara tells us, and this actually has relevance for later this week with Asar B'Tevet, when one of the things that we mourn on the fast day coming up is the translation of the Torah into the Septuagint, into Greek. So the Gemara tells us that, whether it's in the context of translation of Torah, whether it's in the context of writing down Torah Shebaal Peh, because of the danger that was going to be forgotten, Pamim shebitula shel Torah zehu kiyuma. There are times when nullifying the Torah, when going against the Torah, is what allows the Torah to be sustained and to continue to exist. So that's what the Or HaChaim seems to be saying is what the Avot did. That they knew that there were some times when it was more important to sin, to go counter to what the Torah seems to say, in order to bring about some greater purpose, some greater achievement. Whether that's a satisfactory answer to the question of how could we have this tradition that says the Avot kept the Torah, and yet so many examples that seem to contradict it, I don't know. I'm not sure that I'm convinced, but it is a very interesting. It's a very interesting position to put forth. So that's kind of all I have on this. There's not, like I said, I don't think we're going to answer the question, Gary, about historically what do we make of it? Do we buy into the idea or not? But I think it's there's a lot of rich material here. I hope that this gives us some food for thought. I'll see if there's any final questions or comments.
I had just one comment.
Please.
You know how in the blessings over the Torah, over the Shema, there is this the request in the Siddur that just as you taught the Avos the Torah, so please teach us.
Right.
And I really I love that pasuk, because to me it means that there is an ongoing process, and it's because of the chachma of the Torah. It is also largely an unconscious process, but it comes into understanding and expression when we need to have it. Kind of perhaps, or we supposedly learned all the Torah and then forgot it, but there's another process going on all of the time, that we are all learning Torah from Hashem. And why? And it doesn't specify which of the avos. It says avotenu, so it would include all of them. So this business of punctuating which time and which place and under what circumstances and all of that, it seems to me overlooks what I consider to be a very basic process that's going on all of the time. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Beautiful thought.
One of the thoughts I had on this is that on the surface, it may appear that the Avos there was contradictions, but at a deeper level, you might find that it really wasn't a contradiction. And maybe that's more in the line of what the Or HaChaim is saying, that there's some deeper level of something going on. So, because I don't think the notion that they violated the Torah is something that I think our tradition doesn't even allow us to really go into too deeply. So at some level, there was the following of the Torah.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely the traditional answer to this question. Is of course they kept the Torah, and if they seem to not, then there was either we're not reading it correctly, or there was something else going on, some extenuating circumstance. I don't know. It's not so far-fetched to say that someone certainly in a pre-Matan Torah age, to say that you could be fulfilling God's will and doing absolutely what God wants you to do, even if that's a technical violation of a rule that would be given later. So that's I think where a lot of the discomfort with this idea comes from, is 1,000% that these Gemaras, these Midrashim, are trying to drive home an essential point, that everything that we do, everything that we have, can be traced back to Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and even earlier than that. And that's absolutely 1,000% correct.
Mhm.
But whether that means that they kept, that they wore the same outfit that we wear, that whatever our idealized time period in Jewish history is, that's how they dressed, or that they spoke with an Ashkenazis accent, or that they knew Yiddish or were Farsi or whatever, right? So how literally we take this, I think, is where there's there can be some discomfort and some, that's I think where a lot of these questions come from. But 1,000% that the idea that what we are doing and what we've received is a direct continuation of the values that were instilled to us by Abraham, 1,000%. All right, so I'm going to end. Just one note: next week is school vacation. We're going to be not in Baltimore. We're going to be in Deep Creek in Western Maryland, and so there's not going to be a class next week. We will resume in 2021. I think we'll still be in Sefer Bereshit, and we'll look forward to that. So next week, everyone has a week off or a week to do some studying on their own, and we will see everyone in a couple weeks on the Zoom. Hoping to be able to see you on Shabbos in Shul, although the weather does not look like that's going to be happening this week either. But stay tuned for the official announcement on that as well. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi
Thank you.
Yashikov. I have a separate question.